Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Mr. Mackenzie's Distance Learning: The Move to Global War, The Rise of Nazi Germany. Let's begin now. And once again, here we have our map. Hopefully, you guys have memorized this map. We refer to it quite often in this course. So here we have our World War I in Europe map from 1914 to 1918. And before we get into the actual lecture notes, I want us to try and compare how World War I ends for Germany and how World War II ends for Germany, because they're completely different. If you've studied World War II and you know the outcome of World War II, Germany gets surrounded. Hitler is in his bunker in Berlin, and he can hear the bombs of the Soviets getting closer and closer and closer. From the east, the Soviet Union is pushing towards Berlin. From the west, the Allies are advancing towards Berlin as well. Hitler is kind of bunkered down in his bunker, where he eventually takes his own life. Now, if we compare that to how World War I ends, with Germany never really outside of its borders, right? If we look at this map now, that nice blue line along the Western Front there, if we refer to the legend, it says the Armistice Line of November of 1918. So Germany has never really pushed back within the borders of Germany. So psychologically, from the perspective of the German soldiers, when they sign and agree to this armistice, they're returning to Germany not really fully believing that they had lost this war. Now, things weren't going well for Germany by November of 1918. With the entrance of the United States into this war now, obviously that was going to be a huge push for the Allies. So Germany was kind of looking to get out of this war before the United States really resupplies the Allies with ammo and manpower. So really, Germany wants to end World War I before the United States Army gets there. But that's like on the battlefront. What about Germany on the home front? Within Germany, we know that Germany was struggling. The German people were struggling, especially with the British blockade, which was more or less starving the German people out. The Navy began to mutiny in the northern port cities, and ultimately all of this tension and chaos within Germany forces Kaiser Wilhelm to abdicate the throne. Okay, he abdicates, he takes off to the Netherlands. So Germany wants a peace by November of 1918, but it's really a peace that's based on Wilson's 14 points, which we've gone over before, which ultimately would be a pretty good outcome for Germany based on Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Ultimately, it would keep Germany intact. Okay, there were countries like France that really wanted to see Germany dismantled, torn apart. But with Wilson's 14 points, Germany would maintain unification. Germany would be intact. So we really have to remember that the German troops were never pushed back within German borders. So again, psychologically, from the perspective of the German soldier, in their minds when they are returning home, they had not lost this war. But when they did return to their German cities and their towns and homes, it looks like that's exactly what happened, that they had lost this war. So people within Germany, the German military, are going to be angry and bitter about the outcome of World War I. And that's going to lead to their argument of the stabbed in the back argument, that they were stabbed in the back by the socialists and the Jews in the German government. This is the German military and many civilians, their argument of how they were betrayed by the November criminals, as they were called. November being when that armistice was signed, that they were the criminals. And even the people or the German delegates who were at the Paris Peace Conference and signed the Treaty of Versailles, stabbed the German people and the German soldiers in the back. Because a lot of these soldiers didn't perceive that they were losing this war, but upon seeing what the outcome of the Treaty of Versailles was, it looks like they had taken all the blame for the devastation of World War I. So let's look at some of the terms of that Treaty of Versailles. Now, the French thought the treaty wasn't harsh enough. They really wanted to bury Germany. In fact, they wanted to see Germany dismantled. Obviously, there was old beef between the two countries that go back to the Franco-Prussian War. If we look at the British and the United States, they thought it was too harsh. Okay, they would have gone a little bit of an easier tactic with Germany. Obviously, post World War I, they wanted to continue having commerce and business with Germany, and having an intact Germany would be good for Europe and the world, really. But it wasn't harsh enough for France. They really wanted to stick it to Germany. So let's look at some of the geographical terms first. If you look at the orange highlighted area on this map, we can see it is the Rhineland. The Rhineland separates really Germany from France. This area was to be demilitarized. No military was supposed to be in there. Just below the Rhineland, between Alsace-Lorraine and the Rhineland, is the Saar coal fields. Okay, the Saar coal fields. This was once German land, but now, after World War I, it was given to France for 15 years. And basically, everything that was going to be produced from these coal fields was going to be given over to France, and this was going to help out with reparations as well. So the French were going to hold on to it for 15 years, and then a plebiscite was going to happen, which we'll talk about later in this case study. But a plebiscite really goes back to ancient Rome. It's like an ancient Roman word where the plebeians were the everyday common people. So a plebiscite is really a lot like what you'd call a referendum for us. So it's pretty much where the people vote. So a plebiscite was where the people are voting on a decision for the nation. So there's going to be a Saar plebiscite in 15 years of whether or not the Saar coal fields will maintain itself in French hands. Anschluss. Okay, if we look more south towards the bottom here, we see Germany was forbidden to unite with Austria. Okay, no Anschluss. This was forbidden, and this is even forbidden of Austria in their Treaty of Saint-Germain. They were not allowed to have political union with Germany. So that's what the Anschluss was, a political union, and that was forbidden. Poland. If we look over to the east, Poland is back on the map. Poland is a nation again. There were always Polish people living there, but now they have a country of Poland. It is back on the map. And not only that, if you can see, they do have an access now to the Baltic Sea. Poland was given a corridor to the Baltic Sea, cutting off East Prussia from Germany. So it doesn't look like Germany is fully whole. We've cut off a little bit of East Prussia, and the Polish people now have a corridor, or like a gateway, to the Baltic Sea. Germany is going to lose all of its overseas colonies. Their army is going to be limited to 100,000 men, which is a drop in the bucket from the millions that they had during World War I. A very small navy. They're not allowed to have any submarines, no air force, not allowed to have the Luftwaffe. And of course, they ultimately had to sign Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, which really puts Germany on the hook now to pay for all the damages caused during World War I, which legally made them solely responsible for all the horrific atrocities that happened during this war. Now, when World War I ends and when eventually Hitler takes over, there's a new government in Germany called the Weimar government, the Weimar Republic. And we can see that right in the middle of Germany here. A new government met here in Weimar, so Germany was called the Weimar Republic. So for much of the 1920s, Germany's you can almost just refer to it as the Weimar Republic. So we can see there's a lot of harsh geographical terms to this Treaty of Versailles, and we're going to see that when Hitler comes to power, he's going to slowly but surely pick away at these things. Not allowed to have a political, or Rhineland's supposed to be demilitarized. Thus, he's going to bring in the troops and start militarizing that area. He's going to take the Saar coal fields. He's going to have an Anschluss with Austria. He's going to take over Czechoslovakia. And eventually then he rolls the tanks into Poland, and then ultimately we find ourselves back at World War again. Okay, so this brings us to this guy, Adolf Hitler. He will be the focus of everything we're talking about going forward in this case study. So, Adolf Hitler, Austrian born. So he's not German, he is Austrian. But he is a soldier in the German army. Okay, he fights, he's a soldier during World War I, and he fought for Germany. He went to Bavaria and enlisted. And really, why doesn't he just stay and fight with Austria? Why doesn't he join in the Austrian army and fight with Austria? Well, if you're a guy like Hitler, you want to be part of the best army. And for all intents and purposes, Germany had the best continental army in Europe at that time. He didn't really want to sign up with the Austrians and fight maybe Serbians down in the Balkans. He wanted to fight with the best army, and that was Germany. So he goes north, enlists with the Bavarians, and fights with them. And for everything we know, we hear that he fought valiantly and bravely in World War I. He was awarded the Iron Cross. I think there was even a brief time where he was temporarily blinded during a gas invasion. Lost his eyesight for a bit and eventually came back, but did win the Iron Cross. So fought very well in World War I. But as World War I was coming to an end, Hitler is going to be one of those soldiers who believes in the stabbed in the back theory. The war wasn't lost by soldiers on the front, it was really lost by politicians back in Germany. And he's going to refer to them as the November criminals. So, Hitler is going to have a lot of disgust for the Treaty of Versailles and really wants to avenge the outcome of World War I. So after a brief stint at trying to be an artist, which kind of fails, but I'm sure you could go to Google Image and look at some nice landscapes by Adolf Hitler, he really sets his sights on politics. And Hitler will turn really political after World War I. After World War I, Hitler is still a member of the military, and he is sent by the military to invest the German Workers' Party. Some in the German government thought it was trying to subvert the government. So Hitler was looking for some left-wing radical subversion. Instead of investigating, he ends up joining with them and becomes a vocal leader of this party. So Hitler joins the German Workers' Party. Under his leadership, the party will be renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party. National, there it is in German. From that first word there, we really can get kind of abbreviated version of that, and that's really where we get Nazi for short. So he joins up with the German Workers' Party. It's eventually going to become known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And eventually they're going to adopt the swastika as their symbol. This was a symbol that had been around for centuries. Even in some Buddhist cultures, we see the swastika as a symbol there as well, kind of meaning peace and harmony. But now we really just identify with the swastika with hate and intolerance. So the swastika becomes part of their symbol for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Hitler is going to organize what's known as the SA, his brown shirts. This is really, the SS comes later. At first we have what's known as the SA. And these are the stormtroopers in their brown shirts. Mussolini had the black shirts. So Hitler's going to be kind of playing Mussolini's handbook here. And where Mussolini had black shirts, Hitler's going to have brown shirts. Okay, brown is the new black. And basically they're going to be the same thing that they were for Mussolini to Hitler. Okay, they will be his thugs, they will be his enforcers, much like they were for Mussolini. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Hitler's goals. And we're going to look at 3 goals in particular that he had. Goal number 1, abolish the Treaty of Versailles. Obviously, he wants to avenge how World War I ended for Germany, and he wants to rip up the Treaty of Versailles and really stick it to the November criminals that are to blame for what happened to Germany at the end of this war, a war that many soldiers of Germany felt they didn't lose. This is a quote that comes from Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. So this is a quote from Hitler's book. The Versailles Treaty is worthless. 60 million German hearts and minds are on fire with anger and shame. They will cry out, "We want war." Mein Kampf, 1924. Mein Kampf means my struggle. 1924, Hitler writes this book, Mein Kampf, his struggle, that pretty much lays out what should be done with Germany. What's Germany's problems and how can they fix them? So he really kind of lays out all of his plans there in Mein Kampf. And he actually writes this in jail. We'll get to that a little bit later as well. Hitler's second goal is the creation of a greater Germany, or a pan-Germanism, all Germany, unifying all German-speaking people together. Lebensraum. Actually, let's go back first. I want to go over that political cartoon. So his second goal really is a creation of a greater Germany. Any Germans who are living outside of Germany now should be reunited. At the end of World War I, when the political boundaries of Germany was redrawn up, many Germans now found themselves living outside of the political boundaries of that country. They found themselves living in Poland. They found themselves living in Czechoslovakia, or areas that separated France and Germany. Hitler wants to bring them all back together, making a greater Germany, pan-Germanism. If we look at the political cartoon here, we see Hitler kind of stretching out his arms and with the paper in his hand, all Germans everywhere are mine idea. And then we can kind of see these grim reapers here, or these phantoms that show Polish-German crisis, Hungarian-German crisis, Romanian-German crisis, that there's going to be a crisis in each of these countries with the German-speaking people living there, because now Hitler wants to unite them all together. This is the nightmare waiting list. Lebensraum. Hitler wants more Lebensraum, more living space for the growing German population. And of course, this was also lined out in his work, Mein Kampf. Here is a quote. It will be the duty of German foreign policy to get large spaces to feed and house the growing population of Germany. Destiny points us toward Russia. So if people had read Mein Kampf in 1924, they probably would have said, oh, well, it looks like in a few years, Germany's going to look towards the Soviet Union and invade them. Okay, there was very good a lot of foreshadowing going on in Mein Kampf, but by 1924, no one had really heard of Hitler, and people were definitely not taking him seriously politically, considering he wrote this in jail. So, more living space for the Germans. Pan-Germanism. Here is a 1938 propaganda card showing Greater Germany, which includes Austria. 1938, they had that Anschluss, that political union of Austria. And, hey, parts of Poland as well. It also has a bust of Hitler and the Nazi emblem. The text at the bottom reads, "One people, one country, one leader." Hitler's third goal is to make Germany racially pure. Okay, he wanted to make this new unified Germany racially pure. And this really refers to the idea of the social Darwinism, which is that kind of long-held belief that some races are superior than others. And Hitler really placed the Aryan race at the top of that list, that they were the most supreme of all. So, Hitler wants to make a greater Germany, but with only racially pure Germans in it. So that ultimately means he's going to have to drive out non-German populations. And he's, of course, going to target a few minorities that are not racially pure. So he will target the Jews as well as Polish, Slavs, Ukrainians, races that he saw as inferior. Here's some propaganda from that time that really targeted these minorities, particularly the Jewish communities within Germany. From left to right, we'll start with on the left. The anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer often used cartoons to portray Jews as being less than human. This 1934 cartoon praises the Nazi Ministry of Culture for removing Jewish teachers from German classrooms. In the middle. The Nazis were also opposed to the idea of communism. They discriminated against accused communists by sending them to the same concentration camps as Jews. This piece of propaganda shows a Jew with a few coins and a symbol of a scythe and hammer. The scythe and hammer were on the flag of the Soviet Union to represent industry and agriculture. Since the Soviet Union was communist, it was portrayed alongside Jews as an evil force in the world. On the right. The Poisonous Mushroom was an anti-Semitic children's book published by Julius Streicher, the publisher of Der Stürmer newspaper. In the story, a mother and her child are picking mushrooms in the forest, and she explains that the Jewish people are like poisonous mushrooms. She says that, just as a single poisonous mushroom can kill a whole family, so a single Jew can destroy a whole city. Pretty in your face, isn't it? We should remember in the 1920s and the 1930s, the Nazis don't invent anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism had been in Europe since the Middle Ages, if not before that. There was a long, brutal history with the Jewish cultures in Europe, and the Nazis really bring it to the forefront in politics and society, and made it easy for them to pick on and blame certain groups in society, and a lot of these old held racist notions that had been prevalent in that part of the world for centuries you were almost allowed to say it freely at this time, and that's exactly what happens. And it's only going to ramp up and get a lot worse as the 1930s progress in Germany. So besides races, Hitler also saw nations as enemies as well. First, we'll look at the Soviet Union. Okay, the Soviet Union, he sees the entire nation as an enemy. Why? What does he have against the Soviet Union? Well, it's a country that's mostly Slavic, right? We know they have that Slavic connection. That's really what held them to Serbia in the time leading up to World War I. We know there's large Jewish population within the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is communist, which is the kind of the political enemy of the National Socialists, or the dictator that Hitler will be. There's a lot of living space in the Soviet Union. So if Germany can get their hands on some of that land, it's more Lebensraum for Hitler, more living space. Here's another quote from Mein Kampf. "The menace of Russia hangs over Germany. All our strength is needed to rescue our nation from this international snake." So he sees the Soviet Union as an enemy to Germany. He also sees France as an enemy of Germany. Why? What does he have against France? You could probably come up with a few reasons, I'm sure. Okay? France is a longtime rival of Germany. It wasn't that long ago that they went to war, Franco-Prussian War, and Germany really threw their weight around on the continent and pushed France around. And then right after that, they unified as a nation. But it was really France that gave them those harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. They're the ones that dictated those harsh terms to the Treaty of Versailles. So now he wants his revenge against France. So he sees races, the Jewish people, communists as his enemy. He also sees nations as enemies, the Soviet Union and the French. But there are some that he likes. Okay, Hitler has a few nations that will be his allies, or at least that he'll be fond of. So he has some allies. Italy. Why is he friends with Italy? Well, he's going to be watching Mussolini through much of the 1920s. And he's going to be playing Mussolini's fascist handbook throughout much of his rise to power. So they're going to be very similar in their rise to power and how they lead and rule over their countries. So they're going to find themselves in the same camp. Political instability after World War I will allow nations like Japan, Italy, and Germany to become what they become in World War II. So right after World War I, we see political instability within the Weimar Republic. Weimar is the name of the city where the capital was and the new government was seated. So it's the Weimar Republic, and there's a lot of political instability in Germany through much of the early 20s, from 1919 to the early 20s. So a lot of problems. In 1919, we have the communists, a group of communists, German communists, attempting to topple the government. This was known as the Spartacist Revolt. Now remember, when we say communists now, we can't just automatically think, oh, these are Russians who came over from the Soviet Union who are trying to topple the government in the Weimar Republic. No, remember, communism is a disease of the heart, right? When we talked about that in Japan, a disease of the heart. Okay, anyone can be a communist. There were German communists, there were French communists, there were British communists, American communists, and everyone was fearful of these Red Scares that were happening after World War I. So communists within Germany, German communists, attempted to topple the Weimar Republic in 1919, the Spartacist Revolt. And assassinations happening throughout this time were quite prevalent. Assassinations in Weimar Germany were very commonplace from 1919 to about 1922. We're looking at about 350 political assassinations. In January of 1923, we get what's known as the Ruhr Crisis. The Ruhr is an industrial-rich region in West Germany. You can see it on the map right there in the yellow. And according to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to pay reparations to France and Belgium, and this made Germany Baroque. Okay, so the Ruhr area is a rich industrial region in West Germany. Anything that was made, if they couldn't, as long, this also went with their payments to alleviate the money. Anything that was produced in this rich industrial region was going to be shipped and given to France and Belgium. So what I want you to remember at this point is Germany had to pay huge sums of money to France and Belgium after World War I. Remember, they signed that war guilt clause that laid all the blame on their shoulders. Now, legally, they had to pay for it. So they had to pay these reparations to France and Belgium. In December of 1922, Germany misses one of those payments. And then we're going to get what's known as the Ruhr Crisis. Something's going to happen in the Ruhr now because Germany has missed a payment. Okay, the treaty was signed in 1919. It's 1922 now, and they missed a payment. What is going to happen? So the result of this missed payment, what is going to happen? That was December. Now, January of 1923, French and Belgian soldiers march into the Ruhr. They more or less invade. The German government tells the German workers of the Ruhr to passively resist. Go on strike. Don't produce anything for the French and the Belgians. They kind of pretty much go on strike. Passive resistance here. The German government prints more money to pay the German workers who weren't even working. And of course, this is going to lead to hyperinflation, which hugely devalues the currency, basically making it worthless. This becomes an economic disaster for Germany. So, Germany misses one of its reparation payments to Belgium and France, and as a result, they more or less march their troops into the Ruhr. The German government says, go on strike. Hey, but we'll still pay you. We'll just print more money. Beautiful idea. But that obviously blows up in their face because it's a huge economic disaster. Is there anything good that comes out of this? Well, a little bit. There's a little bit of good. What this is going to do is bring international sympathy to Germany. Come on, France. Give Germany a break here, okay? They missed a payment. Relax, okay? Take your troops out of the Ruhr. So an international response to this kind of shakes their finger at France and Belgium. Cut Germany some slack. So after the Ruhr crisis here, in its aftermath, German reparations will be restructured to make it a little bit more easier on them. So feeding on this popular anger and economic crisis of hyperinflation, Hitler and his party will attempt to stage an uprising. This is going to be known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The Beer Hall Putsch. Now, a putsch is an uprising. That just means an uprising. And beer hall is just where it started. Okay, if you've ever been to Germany or if you've ever been to Munich or Berlin, there are many, many beer halls. They're known for these giant beer halls, which is just a big open area with rows of tables and seats where you can fill a lot of people. You can serve them a lot of beer. and they can listen to an inspiring, rousing speech from a leader, and then, that can get people out on the streets marching. So this is pretty much what happens. Hitler's in the beer hall. He's fired up and he's igniting the crowd with his energetic speeches, and then they kind of hit the streets after this putsch, this uprising. So what they're really hoping to do is start in the south, in Munich, and head north to Berlin. So what does this really, or who does this really remind us of, right? It feels like we just kind of talked about this a few days ago when we were looking at Mussolini, right? Obviously, this sounds exactly like Mussolini and his march on Rome. So this is very similar to Mussolini's march on Rome. Hitler is going to march to Berlin. But where Mussolini had about 40,000 black shirts, Hitler is going to have about 600 of his brown shirts. So Hitler organizes the SA, the brown shirts, his stormtroopers. But where Mussolini had 40,000 of his black shirts, Hitler has 600. It's a big difference. And ultimately, that's kind of why it fails. Okay, it's going to pretty much go nowhere. There's strength in numbers, and Hitler didn't have a lot of numbers at this point, so his political uprising is going to fail. And a result of this is that he is arrested. Okay, so the police open fire on the march. Hitler is arrested. He's put on trial. But he actually gets a lot of public fame from this trial. This is how his name gets out there politically. People start to hear more about Adolf Hitler now, even though he's going to find himself in jail. So Hitler has been arrested. He's been put on trial where he gets a little public fame, but now he gets 5 years in prison. But he gets released after 1. And he only serves 1 year because he probably got let out for good behavior, because for most of that year he was really just kind of hunkering down and writing his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. So most of that year, while he's serving his time, he's writing out Mein Kampf, which really lays out much of his plans for Germany, like creating a greater Germany, like making a racially pure Germany, like acquiring more Lebensraum, or living space, for Germans. Mein Kampf doesn't really do well on the bestsellers list. It kind of flops. It's a dud. No one really takes it seriously. I mean, it's written by some political wacko who's from jail, so no one's really kind of taken it seriously in 1924. But once Hitler becomes the leader, once he becomes Mein Führer, years later, he's going to require all Germans to own it. It will be mandatory to own a copy. Then it becomes a bestseller. So, in jail, Hitler has learned a few things. He's going to not try and take over the government with force. He will try to do things by legal means now. Okay, so once Hitler is released from jail, he realizes revolutionary actions may not be the best avenue to take. He will try to do things more democratically by more legal means now. So Hitler realizes that he can't use revolutionary actions to take over the government. He has to kind of do things by more legal means, but he's going to find this a little bit difficult to do in the mid to late 1920s, when all of a sudden it looks like Germany was starting to recover from those economic woes shortly after the Great War. Okay, so by the mid to late 20s, Germany starts to recover. And that's really thanks to this guy right here, Gustav Stresemann, the Weimar former foreign minister. He kind of gets Germany back on its feet again during the mid to late 1920s, where we're going to see Germany becoming an important world player again. So how does he going to help out Germany? Well, he's going to get loans from the United States to help out with that hyperinflation. He wanted to rework the Treaty of Versailles. He's going to be part of that kind of internationalist spirit of the 1920s when we see Germany themselves signing the Locarno Treaty, agreeing to the western borders as stated on the Versailles Treaty. They joined the League of Nations in 1926. Germany even signs the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. All of this happens years before Adolf Hitler takes power in Germany. Because during this time, kind of the mid to late 20s, Germany is kind of getting back on its feet again. Things are going relatively well for Germany. Hopefully nothing economically disastrous happens. Oh, right, the Great Depression. So when the Depression hits, the United States will call in the loans they gave to Germany. It's time to pay up. Now Germany is going to stop loaning money to Germany, and unemployment will skyrocket in Germany. Okay, unemployment rises in Germany. So now, with a little bit of uncertainty in society in Germany, racial radical ideas are becoming more appealing now. Hitler will portray his Nazi party as the only party that can bring back jobs. The caption for the photo here: 3 Jewish businessmen forced to march down the main street in Leipzig commercial center, carry signs saying, "Don't buy from Jews, buy from German businesses." As the Great Depression worsens through the 1930s, the Nazi Party will gain more and more votes with each election. 1932, the Nazis get 30% of the votes. Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany, the number 2 behind the president. And if you can kind of recognize him from the photo there, the president of that time was von Hindenburg. We mentioned him during World War I, one of the great German generals of World War I. So Hitler, by 1932, becomes the number 2 man. He's the Chancellor of Germany, just behind the president. In February of 1933, there's a fire at the Reichstag, the German Capitol building. Their seat of parliament and government burns to the ground. The Nazis will blame the communists, not the Russians. Remember, we're not just talking about Russians, we're talking about German communists. Now, Hitler is going to use this now. He's going to use this plot to gain political power and support. The next election, the Nazis get 44% of the votes. As Hitler's power is growing, he's eventually going to sign what becomes known as the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act. This will give Hitler and his cabinet unchallenged legislative power. So now we're going to see Hitler starting to use that fascist dictator's playbook that he probably got off Mussolini. He starts rolling out his totalitarian playbook here. Communists will be barred from the government. Hitler now has all the parts he needs to amend the Constitution to his own bidding. State parliament will be abolished. There's going to be only one national government. Trade unions or labor unions are going to be closed. Socialist and communist parties throughout Germany are also going to be banned. This brings us to an event known as the Night of Long Knives in 1934, the Night of Long Knives, where we see hundreds of political opponents to Hitler, whether they were Nazis or not, and a lot of them were, are going to be murdered. So here we see Hitler purging any political opponent. Imagine this. Anyone who did not fall in line with Hitler's regime or ideology, that did not surrender devout loyalty to him, was not just fired, removed from a job, but actually murdered and killed. Hundreds in one night. This is his totalitarian grip squeezing on Germany now. Our political cartoon by David Lowe, a very famous one. We all know what the Hitler salute is, right? It's the one-armed raised straight into the sky. The caption at the bottom of this one says, "They salute with both hands now," as if the German army is surrendering to Hitler, that they are going to be devout and they're going to be loyal to Hitler. And on the in tatters on the ground there, we see Hitler's unkept promises. And in the bottom of the foreground there, you can see what happens to people if they don't salute with both hands now. They become eliminated. So here we have, there's a lot of imagery here. Obviously, we have the very militaristic and aggressive looking Hitler there. He's got a smoking gun in his hand, kind of our old world image of the Viking with strength there. And then we kind of have the weaselly pet at his feet there. That's going to be Joseph Goebbels. That we will talk a little bit about him later. He is his minister of propaganda. The next year, the president, Paul von Hindenburg, dies. Hitler will merge the office of chancellor and president together. He will be both. And he's going to proclaim himself the Führer, the leader of Germany. No longer is there a number one and a number two. Hitler is now both. And with that power, he can rewrite the Constitution to his political ideology and place people that follow his ideology in important places, in cabinets, on seats in the courts. Everything will be firmly in Hitler's grasp. We're going to stop there today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope this one didn't run too long. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.